All right. I think this is what? 9 point. What are we on? 9.2. A reported monster is told of in the Scientific America, July 22nd. Dr. Clement Anelli, director of the Zoological Gardens of Buenos Aires, had published a letter that had been sent to him by an American prospector named Sheffield, who said that in the Argentine territory of Chubut, he had seen huge tracks, which he had followed to the lake. There I saw in the middle of the lake an animal with a huge neck, like that of a swan, and the movement of the water made me suppose the beast to have a body like that of a crocodile. I wrote to Dr. Onelli and received a reply dated August 15th, 1924, telling that again he had heard of the monster. Maybe this same huge necked creature was seen somewhere else, however, we explain it getting there. The trouble in trying to understand all reported monsters is their mysterious appearances and disappearances. In the London Daily Mail, February 8th, 1921, a huge unknown animal near the Orange River, South Africa, is told of by Mr. F.C. Cornell, FRGS. It was something with a neck like a bending tree trunk, something huge, black, and sinuous. It devoured cattle. The object may have been a python, but if it was of incredible size. It is only preposterously unreasonable to think that the same thing could have appeared in South Africa and then in South America. The blonde beast of Patagonia, which was supposed to be a huge ground sloth, parts of which are now in various museums, attracted attention in the year 1899. See the zoologist, August 1899. Specimens of the blonde's hide were brought to England by Dr. F.P. Moreno, who believed that the remains had been preserved for ages. We prefer to think otherwise, so we note that Dr. Amegino, who got specimens of the hide from the natives, said that it was their story that they had killed it. There was a volley of monsters from some other world about the time of the Charleston earthquake, or some one thing skipped around with marvelous agility, or it is that just before the quake there were dull times for the newspapers. So many observations in places far apart can be reconciled by thinking that not a creature but explorers in a construction had visited this earth. They may have settled down in various places. However, it is pretty hard to be reconciled to our reconciliations. New York Sun, August 19th, 1866, a horned monster in Sandy Lake, Minnesota. More details in the London, Ontario Advisor. Chris Engelstein fired a shot at it but missed. Then came dispatches from the seacoast. According to one of them, Mr. G.P. Putnam, principal of a Boston grammar school, had seen a monster in the sea at Gloucester in Science 8-258. Mr. B.A. Colonna of the U.S. Coast Survey writes that upon the 29th of August he had seen an unknown creature in the sea off Cape Cod. In the New York newspapers early in September, a monster was reported as having been seen at sea off Southport and off Norwalk, Connecticut, in Michigan, in the Connecticut River, and in the Hudson River. The conventional explanation is that this was simply an epidemic of fancied observations. Most likely, some of them were only contagions. There's a yarn or a veritable account in the New York Times, June 10th, 1880. Monstrous dead things floating on the sea, bottom up. Sailors rowed to it, climbed up its sides. They danced on its belly. That's a merry little story, but I know a more romantic one. It seems that a monster was seen from a steamship. Then the lonely thing mistook the vessel for a female of his species. He overwhelmed her with catastrophic endearments. But I am avoiding stories of traditional serpentine monsters of the sea. One reason is that collection of these stories are easily available. The astronomer has not lived who has ever collected and written a book upon data not sanctioned by the dogmas of his cult, but my slightly favorable opinion of biologists continues, and I note that a big book of sea serpent stories was written by Dr. Odelmans, director of the zoo at The Hague, Holland. When that book came out, a review of it in Nature was not far from abusive. Away back in the year 1848, conventionalists were outraged because of the source of one of these stories. For the account by Captain Macquarie of HMS Daletis of a huge unknown creature said by him to have been seen by him in the ocean August 6th, 1848. See the Zoologist, Volume 6. Someone else who bothered the conventionalist was the captain of the royal yacht, the Osborne, who, in an official report to the Admiralty, told of having seen a monster not serpent-like off the coast of Sicily, May 2nd, 1877. See the London Times, June 14th, 1877, and Land and Water, September 8th, 1877. The creature was turtle-like, visible part of the body about 50 feet long. There was an attempt to correlate this appearance with a submarine eruption, but I have found that this eruption in the Gulf of Tunis had occurred in February. The suggestion was that in depths of the ocean may live monsters which are occasionally cast to the surface by submarine disturbances. It is a convenience, except that unknown sea monsters exist, and how account for the relatively few observations upon things so conspicuous that they live in ocean depths and come only occasionally to the surface. I have gone into the subject of deep sea dredging and in museums have looked at models of deep sea creatures, but I have never heard of a living thing of considerable size that has been brought up from profound ocean depths. William Beebe has never brought up anything of that kind. On his Arcturus adventure, anything that got away from him and his hooks and his nets and his dredges must have been small and slippery. It seems that anything with an exposure of wild surfaces could not withstand great pressure. However, this is only reasoning. Before the days of deep sea dredging, scientists reasoned that nothing at all could live far down in the sea. Also, now most of them would argue that because of the great difference between pressures, any living thing coming up from the ocean depths would burst. Not necessarily so, according to Beebe. Some of the deep sea creatures that he brought up were so unconventional as to live several hours and to show no sign of disruption. So, like everybody else, I don't know what to think, but rather uncommonly, I know that. In October 1883, there was a story in the newspapers I take from the Quebec Daily Mercury, October 7th, 1883, of an unknown animal, which was seen by Captain Seymour of the bark Hope On, off the Pearl Islands, about 50 miles from Panama. In Knowledge, November 30th, 1883, Richard Proctor tells of this animal and says that it had been reported by officers of a steamship. This one was handsome. Anyway, it had a head like that of a handsome horse. It had either 4 legs or 4 jointed fins, covered with a brownish hide upon which were large black spots. Circus horsish. About 20 feet long. There was another story told about the same time. New Zealand Times, December 12th, 1883. Report by a sea captain who had seen something like a turtle 60 feet long and 40 feet wide. Perhaps stories of turtle-backed objects of large size relate to submersible vessels. If there were no submersible vessels of this earth in the year 1883, we think of submersibles from somewhere else. Why they should be so secretive, we can't much inquire into now, because we are so much concerned with other concealments and suppressions. I suspect that in other worlds, or in other parts of one existence, there is esoteric knowledge of the human beings of this earth kept back from common knowledge. This is easily thinkable because even upon this earth there is little knowledge of human beings. There have been suggestions of an occult control upon the minds of the inhabitants of this earth. Let anybody who does not like the idea that his mind may be most subtly controlled without his knowledge of it think back to what propagandists did with his beliefs in the year 1914 to 1918. Also, he need not think so far back as that. The standardized explanations by which conventional science Scientists have checked inquiry into alleged appearances of strange living things in the ocean are mentioned in the following record. Something was seen off the west coast of Africa, October 17th, 1912. Passengers on a vessel said that they had seen the head and neck of a monster. They appointed a committee to see to it that record should be made of their observations. In the Cape Times, October 29th, 1912, Mr. Wilmot, former member of the Cape Legislative Council, records this experience, saying that there is no use trying to think that four independent witnesses had seen nothing but a string of dolphins or a gigantic strand of seaweed or anything else except an unknown monster. It's the fishmonger of Worcester in his marine appearance. In this field of reported observation, so successful has been a seeming control of minds upon this earth and guidance into picturing nothing but a string of dolphins or a gigantic strand of seaweed, that now that the ghost has been considerably rehabilitated, though in my own records of hundreds of unexplained occurrences, the ghost like scarcely ever appears. The sea serpent is foremost in representing what is supposed to be the mythical. I don't know how many books I have read, in each of which is pictured a long strand of seaweed with the root end bulbed and gnarled grotesquely like a head. I suppose that hosts of readers have been convinced by these pictures. But if a monster from some else, but if a monster from somewhere else should arrive upon the land of this earth, and perhaps being out of adaptation should die upon the land, probably it would not be seen. I have noted several letters to newspapers by big game hunters who have never heard of anybody coming upon a dead elephant. Sir Emerson Tennant has written that, though he had often inquired of Europeans and Cingalese, he had never heard of anybody who had seen the remains of an elephant in the forests of Ceylon. A jungle soon vegetates euphemisms around its obscenities, but the frank ocean has not the perjuries of a jungle. Strange bones have often been found on land. They have soon been conventionalized. When bones of a monster are found, the pattern makers of a museum arrange whatever they can into conventional structures and then fill in with plaster colored differently so that there shall be no deception. After a few years, these differences become undetectable. There is considerable dissatisfaction with the paleontologist. I noticed in museums that even when plaster casts are conspicuously labeled as nothing but plaster casts, some honest fellow has dug off chips to expose that there isn't a bone in them. What we're looking for is an account of something satisfactorily monstrous and not more or less in the distance, something that is not of paleontologic memory that has been jogged so plasterfully. The sea is the best field for data. In the MEMS Western National History Society 1 418 is published a paper by Dr. Barclay who tells of the remains of an unknown monster that has been cast up by the sea in September 1808 at Stronza, one of the Orkneys. We've got a hold of something now that was well observed. As fast as they could, observers got rid of this hunk, which for weeks under a summer sun had been making itself evidential. But the evidence came back, so again the observers got a rope and towed it out to sea. Sultry day soon, a flop on the beach, more observations. According to different descriptions, the affidavits by inhabitants of Stronza, the remains of this creature had 6 arms or paws or wings. There is a suggestion of stumps of fins here, but it is said that the bulk was without the least resemblance or affinity to fish. Dr. Blake Barclay told that in his procession was part of the mane of the monster. A perhaps similar bulk was, upon the 1st of December 1896, cast upon the coast of Florida 12 miles south of St. Augustine. There were appendages or ridges upon it, and at first these formations were said to be stumps of tentacles. But in the American Naturalist 31-304, Professor A.E. Verrill says that this suggestion that the mass of flesh was the remains of an octopus is baseless. The mass was 21 feet long, 7 feet wide, and 4.5 feet high. Estimated weight 7 tons. Reproductions of several photographs are published in the American Naturalist. Professor Verrill says that despite the great size of this mass, it was only part of an animal. He argues beliefs in the he argues that it was part of the head of a creature like a sperm whale, but he says that it was decidedly unlike the head of any ordinary sperm whale, having no feature of a whale's head. Also, according to description in the New York Herald, December 2nd, 1896, the bulk seems not to have been whale-like. The hide is of a light pink color, nearly white, and in the sunshine has a distinct silvery appearance. It is very tough and cannot be penetrated even with a sharp knife. A pink monster or an appalling thing with the look of a cherub is another of our improvements upon conventional biology. For a yarn or an important record of a reptile of prehistoric size and appearance said to have been found on the beach of the Gulf of Francesca, Salvador, see the New York Herald Tribune, June 16, 1928. It was about 90 feet long, marked with black and white stripes, and was exceedingly corpulent, good-natured. Fat monsters, too, are new to me. I have searched especially for sea stories of hairy or fur-covered monsters. Such creatures would not be sea animals in the exclusive sense that something covered with scales might be. If unknown, they would have to be considered inhabitants of lands. Then up comes the question, what lands?